Hey guys, my name is Brandon Tortorelli, and this is my FMEA presentation on the Environmental Control and Life Support System of the International Space Station. Okay, so the first subsystem is the temperature and humidity control, and as you can see, the first three have the same failure cause. This is something that's known to be occurring now, and the problem is that a condensing heat exchanger, as part of the THC, it has a hydrophilic coating which tends to degrade and release solid particles downstream, and those can cause blockages in different valves and filters and the condensate separator. So because this is occurring, we know it's probable to occur, so I gave it a 6. It can be pretty severe if it's not treated, so I gave it an 8. But it only has a 2 in detectability because we know it's occurring, and so they're kind of currently working on finding ways to alleviate that, such as filters and stuff. In the other case that's really similar is a ventilation blockage. This had occurred due to excessive layers of lint building up on the ventilation fans, but it is detectable and is being treated with filters on the inlet of those fans. So all those risks, though they could be severe, we know they're happening, so we're treating them. Next is the carbon dioxide removal assembly. Kind of similar case for this. The upstream of the CDRA is the trace contaminant control assembly, and in that there is a sorbent bed that originally was not constrained, and due to that it was releasing some particles in microgravity that were coming downstream and blocking up valves and pumps in the CDRA. So since the CDRA is made up of 2 units, this problem occurred in the first unit, and they fixed it by adding filters and just watching for it. And in the second unit, they modified the design so that that bed would be constrained, and then they could alleviate this from happening. So it's kind of probable to occur because it has been occurring. A little bit severe if it should cause the CRA to fail. Of course, then there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere and poisonous to astronauts. However, it's detectable. We know it's happening, so we're taking care of it. And then just the air contamination control system, I'll break it down into subsystems on the next slide, but in terms of the overall system, it has these HEPA filters that need to be constantly replaced. So as long as those are replaced, we're good, but if not, then it could be a severe risk as microbes and particles are released through the air. Okay, so next we have the trace contaminants control assembly, which is part of the air contamination control. The big problem with this is the thermal catalytic oxidizer. If it fails, then it could be severe because we have contaminants going around in the air. It's not all that detectable should something happen with it, but it's also not probable that it should fail. The cases are that it has a cooling system which keeps it from overheating and also keeps it from becoming poisoned from upstream materials. So if something should happen and that should fail, then we'd have a problem. The other case is just whether if the charcoal absorption beds were not replaced, then of course we'd have a problem, but that's highly detectable and we replace them regularly. Next is the major constituent analyzer, and there's 2 problems with this. One is that it has to be operated at vacuum. So if something should happen and it's not a vacuum, then it won't work and we have a big failure. We know that the ion pump has a limited life, so it is probable that it will fail, which is why there's a 5 in probability. I'm not sure if they know when, and I'm not sure if they have a backup ready on board, but it could present a risk. The other factor is that the MCA only analyzes the certain materials that are regulated in ISS, such as oxygen, nitrogen, CO2, and it doesn't detect other gases, such as toxic gases. And in the case of ISS, there's a lot of scientific experiments occurring, and there could just be a lot of unforeseen material chemical interactions which possibly could release some undetectable toxic gases into the air, such as ammonia, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde. And if the MCA can't detect these, which is not designed to, then that could be a huge risk to the astronauts. They wouldn't know those materials are there, they could breathe them in and become poisoned. So that's a big problem and has one of the highest risks of this assessment. Next is the oxygen generation system. No big risks with this. It's a system that's been proven on ISS for a long time, but also on submarines on Earth for a very long time. And as long as the electrolysis keeps occurring and it gets power to perform that function, then it should be fine. Next are the oxygen and nitrogen storage tanks. Not huge problems here. You assume, there's a possibility of a leak, which is hard to detect, and it would be severe, but it's not very likely to occur. These are pretty robust systems they use. But one problem is we do know that if something should happen and they run out of storage O2 in the tanks, they can't replace it with oxygen generated from the OGA. That's because that only produces oxygen at ambient pressure, so it cannot refill those tanks. So if something happened and a resupply mission from Earth was delayed and they needed extra oxygen and nitrogen, say that was lost during airlock depressurization, they wouldn't be able to repressurize it themselves, so that is a problem. Okay, and the system with the most inherent risks in the ECLSS is the Water Reclamation Assembly. As you can see, there were a lot of problems with blockages due to particulates from the water processing assembly. The packed bed catalytic reactor was leaking some particulates that went downstream and plugged up some valves and pressure regulators. So we know that occurs as probability of 5. It can be severe if we let it occur. However, we have regular cleaning and flushing cycles and filters to prevent it from happening, so it's very detectable. Another case was when a stainless steel material used in the urine processing assembly was replaced with another material, and when that material interacted with the toxic and acidic chemical additives in the pretreated urine, it started to off-gas and set off pressure sensors and to degrade. So though they took care of that problem, it presents the risk of just switching materials in that pretreated urine environment and the possibility that unforeseen reactions could occur. And the rest of these are just kind of based on the complexity of the mechanical system, and just if the water processor assembly or the urine processing assembly were to fail overall, then of course it would be really severe because the astronauts would not be able to recycle their water, but this is very rare to occur and very detectable beforehand. Okay, and the next system is the fire detection and suppression system. This is also a highly risky system in the ECLSS. There are cases of false fire alarms going off due to dust accumulation setting them off. So you know that's probable to happen, but it's not that severe, and we can detect it. However, a big problem is that the fire extinguishers used in the US segments are carbon dioxide type. And so most experiments that might be combustible are done in an isolated credible fire zone, and that's a small area where they know that if the fire occurs, then they can easily put it out with just a simple 6-pound burst of CO2 from a fire extinguisher. However, if something should happen where there's an open cabin fire, then things get a lot hairier, because if the astronauts try to fight that fire with the extinguishers, they can release a lot of CO2 into the ISS environment. And if the CDRA can't remove that CO2, then suddenly they created an environment that's now toxic for them to breathe. So that's why that open cabin fire failure mode has a high severity, a low detectability, and it's not too probable, but it could happen and it could be bad. The next systems here is the waste and hygiene compartment is basically a septic tank. Not a lot of risk associated with that as long as there's no leaks or it doesn't overflow. But nothing super big to worry about there. Next is the sabatier. So that takes CO2 and converts it into water and methane. If it should fail, then of course we have loss of water and more CO2 in the system, but the likelihood of that happening is not very high. A more severe risk is that if there's a leak in the seal or the hose, and instead of venting methane overboard, it actually vents methane into the ISS, then that could be serious because that's highly flammable, could definitely cause a lot of problems, and maybe not all that detectable besides by smell, but by that point it could be too late. And then the last section here is not necessarily a subsystem, but I wanted to include it because although there's not, say, like environmental risks should something in the life support system fail on ISS, there are definitely, you say, like human environmental risks. So especially to the realm of human space exploration. So for example, if there were failures and astronaut lives were lost due to some of these ECLSS failures, then there'd be a loss of human morale for space exploration. That'd be very severe. Everyone would be deeply hurt by that and be like, oh wow, should we really even be sending people up there? And even if something happened and one of these failures just harmed astronauts, then there could be a potential loss of funding for these type of human space exploration activities. So though those aren't probable to occur, and we can hopefully see them coming way beforehand, they would be very severe if they did occur. So those are some inherent risks.